Now I'll take on some questions from the audience.
Sir, one thing is we are only thinking about
Sure.
high-rise buildings. Who takes the responsibility of the building if it collapses? One. What is the level of disaster management? Second. And in the parking level, in earthquake, in a designing of earthquake buildings, in the parking level, you have just shown the pillars, which is against the norms of a building in case of a earthquake. Because I have been recently to Bellary to see the building collapsed. Design was good, everything was good. It has failed only due to the material. The cement was not correct.
I don't know about that part. When something collapses, what will be done? But there are sufficient number of engineering talents in India that will take care of that part. What was the other second question?
So my question is, who takes the responsibility in
will
disaster
be taken
management?
by the society of people. Now that's what I mentioned about earlier, that we'll have to regroup these ideas of society and also the developers. The developer will also have a stake in maintaining this building. So that all these things have to be worked out, just as we worked out about the society building. But collapse, you don't worry, that is self-supporting building.
Thank you.
The building built higher than this.
Thank you, gentlemen, please.
Hello. Hello, hi. My name is Richard Witt from Raw Architects in Toronto, Canada. I've got a question for the first speaker. We do a lot of work in Toronto with Toronto Community Housing Corporation, and I noticed in your presentation there's a lot of similarities of issues such as the adjacencies of the haves and the have-nots, social housing aesthetic that people are concerned with, implementation of community facilities. There's quite often, especially amongst the architects, a kind of utopian vision for how people should live, especially in social housing communities. But we're often discouraged by Toronto Community Housing from providing a lot of community facilities within the complexes because it encourages people to stay. And what I'm wondering is, so far you're talking about taking people from slums and putting them into a certain kind of housing which is similar but hopefully better. Is there any interest or vision beyond that and a kind of upward mobility socially and economically for the inhabitants?
Yeah, as I had spoken in my talk, yes, definitely we have to create revenue generating models for the occupants as we move them. Because we have to understand that today they are earning an X amount. Tomorrow when they're moving into a new rehabilitated building, they're still earning the same X amount. But their taxes and their standard of living has changed. So for that, we have to try to generate revenue models within the housing community. Like in India, in Bombay, you must have seen a lot of hoarding sites on the buildings. These hoarding sites are normally hired out by the people who are in the business of advertising, and they pay money to the society for that. So this could be one source of revenue. Parking lots, like I mentioned, is another area because there are a lot of slums which are located in prime areas, within prime commercial areas, areas where parking is a requirement. So if you add a basement to their building, which will add a cost, certainly, but it becomes a lifetime support for them to generate their revenue within. So that comfort factor is there when they move into a new rehab project, that there's no additional burden of cost on them.
Makta Chauhan, Director of Rizvi College of Architecture. The question is to Sen. You mentioned about the need for reinventing town planning norms. It's a wonderful project that you have done, and you've been working on this for quite some time. Have you taken it further to propose certain new bylaws or new guidelines which we can incorporate in the planning process?
My focus is generally not on these aspects of architecture. And since I don't have a concrete project, of course 3 of the projects were not built, what we had proposed. But only when we have a proposal, then we can go to municipality and say that these are the bylaws that need to be changed. For example, bylaw 80 something would say that green space should be 1/3. But we are saying that this green space should be contiguous. It should be connected to each other and not spots on this 85-acre site. So these are the kind of things that they are also able to understand and change if we have a concrete proposal. So certain areas of that nature have been discussed, but not all of these. They will not allow me to put up a restaurant on the 17th floor mountain because they have never seen it. So we have to work on it. It's like Corbusier, who had not built for many, many years, had proposed Marseille's apartment where the toilets were inside. So the municipal people didn't approve of this. And so Corbusier said he has waited 6 years without project, he will wait 2 more years. And now all our hotels, all our restaurants have rooms like that and bathrooms like that. So I think it is all a continuous process. Unless we think and dream of ideas, I think the change cannot happen. How can you say just change it and then I'll see what I can do? That's the reverse. We cannot do.
My name is Surendra Gupta Sam from Pondicherry. I have 2 questions. Both of them are directed for my own enhanced learning. I'm a founder of Golden India, wherein we are trying to make an out-of-box program for governance of collective living. To Mr. Rizvi, as you have finally put forward the concept of integration, as Albert Einstein says, you cannot solve problems at the same level of consciousness where it has been created. So while you are describing the material sciences or the advances and learning from that, how are you going to tackle with the problems which are non-material of belonging to human nature? And in that, the implementation, how do you see that? Second question is to Mr. Gautam. You have a puzzle of 3 A's. What is the priority of those 3 A's? As the way you have mentioned, starting with affordable, does it address that is the focus where we start looking at the problems? And if we change that priority, does the line and direction of action change dramatically? Thank you.
Well, to answer the first, like I had spoken, we need to understand the psychology of the people who stay there. Now, for that, there has to be a social consciousness and a certain level of intelligence to understand and get in and understand the requirement. These things that I have mentioned, none of the slum dwellers themselves have asked me. A community hall, which I would be providing in some of my projects, I have not been asked to by either the SRA or by the inhabitants themselves. These things that I've mentioned, they have a very simple desire. They say, move us out of this house and give us a new house. What that new house, all they're looking at is a painted, nice one-room kitchen where they have an inbuilt toilet. That's all that they feel is their requirement. But as they move into that, their requirements are going to change. Now, this is where we as educated people have to assess their psychology, that what are the change of requirements that will come later, so to provide for it now. Whether you take them into confidence at this point of time or whether they tell you, no, it doesn't matter. We are an educated lot. We can assess. We can use methods by speaking to them and understanding what their pains and the issues are. So once we get a grip on that, by being and taking the initiative yourself and raising your social consciousness within, rather than just looking at the bottom lines of a business, that will prompt you from within to see what are the things that you need to add, and you will start wanting to add new things to see that they are happy and satisfied. So it has to come from within.
Plan for solutions, their consciousness level. If they are going to think from the same angle and same context, then maybe it's not going to get integrated. So I'm just wondering whether are you looking at the people and making a team of different type of people?
No, as in which team are we talking about? Are we talking about the people who are residing there currently in the slums?
No. The people who are sort of trying to find solutions to their problems in an integration. That integration has to be thought about by people of different consciousness.
There are plenty of stakeholders involved in a development of slums. There are the urban planners, there are the scheme makers, which is the government and the bureaucracy which is there. There are activists who are involved. So you have to involve all of them to understand their views, and you need to pick out those people in their entire planning process who do not have any vested interest, because there are a lot of vested interest from a practical working point of view in Bombay. So you have to pick out the right people.
I think I'll leave that because I won't take up the time.
Thank you.
But it was directed not at the talent and capability, not the kabiliyat, not the kamyabi, but the consciousness level. The people who have got, larger sensitivity for the governance of collective living. Anyway, keep it in your mind.
Thank you. Next.
If I go back to my 3 A's, if I have to prioritize, I would first tackle the issue of acceptability, then availability, and affordability is a byproduct of the two. By acceptability, I would certainly try and take you through what exists today. If Mumbai, 54% have been staying in these informal settlements, they are not the right type of settlement to live in. They are substandard. There are a variety of problems. Main problems, apart from being an eyesore, is the infrastructure and the amenities, which are terribly lacking there. And then 2, of course, is the quality of the housing. Now, when we actually take an informality into the formal setup, we have only one set of standard, the Development Control Regulation, which talks about that it should be brick mortar, it should be a minimum house size of this, the layout should be this, the footprint should be this much, there should be this wide roads and all that. Can we think about lowering standards? Can we have graded standards? So that at least the urban poor can actually get into a new settlement which can be thought of, where we are not creating formally a slum-like a situation, but we are creating a little lower than the acceptable standards layout, where maybe the footprint under the housing is not 60% as may be required and 40% for access and other things. We have only pedestrian accesses there and we have maybe 75 to 80% housing. So high density, low rise housing. It solves 2 problems. One, it actually, of course, brings the acceptability standard to say that yes, this is also acceptable. And 2, this also fights against the eviction that the market does, what we call as gentrification. Because of the huge gap between supply and demand, whenever we create any housing for the economically weaker section, we always have the market evicting them. The people who are not belonging to that target group throwing out. We have seen it in MHADA houses. It is meant for an economically weaker section person, but invariably you have other people who are trying to grab that. Even for slum housing that we create, housing stock, we have a situation where the market forces them to sell it off and go away and encash that, the value of the flat. Therefore, if we can create housing stock, which in fact is meant for the economically weaker section by bringing down the standards, so acceptability, I would say, is an area to tackle. And if we tackle that, second would be the availability. We have to actually accept that land has to be made available to the urban poor. We cannot live with an idea of 6% space is adequate for 50% of the population. So inclusionary zoning, and then if we do these 2, I think we will be able to come out with affordability.
Thank you.
Greetings. Question to Mr. Chatterjee. If I step outside Mumbai for a minute and think about India as an entity, we have a set of tier 1 and tier 2 cities which could range in maybe 20 to 30, a count of 20 to 30. And then quickly you move to the tier 3 and 4 cities. What needs to be done in the tier 3 and 4 cities at this stage so that they don't land up with the similar problems that we have in the tier 1s and 2s? And is anything actually being done to that effect?
Thank you.
In fact, if you would have read a newspaper item which came out yesterday, that the government of Maharashtra's Urban Development Department has come out with a vision document, which is still not in the public domain, but shortly, I suppose, as soon as the government takes a decision, it will come out. As I said, that if 40% of the present population of Maharashtra is in the urban setup, which includes the tier 1 to tier 4 cities, over the next 15-20 years, you will have maybe 60% staying in that. So, in what manner will the expansion or will the urbanization take place? Basically, as I mentioned, in 3 different areas. 1 is densification of the existing cities. 2, expansion of the existing cities. 3, creation of new townships. And I think the government is thinking in all these 3 lines. That's how we're going to tackle the problem.
Sir, I have a question for Mr. Chatterjee. First, I thank you for such a powerful presentation and good work that you are doing for this rehabilitation and all. That today the problem of slum is by and large exists in all major cities in India. And it is also a fact that the people who stay there, they provide you service at very cheaper and is a lower cost and makes our life comfortable. At the same time, that also brings a lot of other problems. Do you not feel that it is equally important to work in parallel for upliftment of the lifestyle in rural area so that the flow of people is being restricted to some extent? Others, today you are having your plan because you have facts and figures which are there for last 100 years. But if the trend continues, might be today in Mumbai this problem is critical, but it can become similar, other cities as well, right? So what kind of policy we can think of so that the model is sustainable, or else down the line after 1 decade, 2 decades, as Mr. Rizvi mentioned that in last 2 decades the dwellers number has gone double, triple, then we'll be sitting again to find solution how to tackle the issues, which may come up down the line might be after some time.
Well, urbanization in India doesn't take place only due to push factors of the villages. The theory says that urbanization is both push and pull. So there is an inherent attraction of a city. And therefore, urbanization is imminent. It has to take place. It does not mean that we should not focus ourselves also in the rural areas on rural industrialization and other things in order to arrest the push factors from the villages. But while you do that, it does not mean you need not see the other issue also. I totally agree with you that yes, the rural areas also need to be seen because this is a continuum. It cannot be in exclusion we think only about urbanization and forget about the rural areas. But let us also not get into that sort of a mindset that if we tackle the rural, urban gets automatically tackled. No, it will not happen. So both have to be seen. How to ensure that we arrest the push factors and how, because of the pull, we see that there has to be migration into the cities. Migration will not be only white-collar jobs. There will be urban poor moving into the city. They have to be provided space to live.
One more last question.
I'm Deepak Kudare, developer from Pune. I got 2 questions. One is to Mr. Rizvi, the other one is Mr. Gautam. The first question to Mr. Rizvi, you have been talking about integrated some developing authorities and the scheme under SRA. I mean, in that case, Pune, we have got a lot of slums and we have got a lot of land which is spread over. So we make the provision that, you see, the slum dwellers housing building is different than the normal building. Will that be possible in Mumbai? That's a question. And can we be able to make it a mandatory that you were talking about the education and hygiene to be taught to them? So can we make something like mandatory under this SRA Act? That this is the question to you. Then the question to Mr. Gautam is regarding this participation. You had your sum up was 4 Ps. So is there any possibility of we private entrepreneurs to accommodate into the affordable housing of MHADA, whereby we provide you the land and then you construct or we construct togetherly and then sell it to the people who are interested in getting the affordable housing? Thank you.
To answer your second question first, about making things mandatory. The problem with making things mandatory is that it is not accepted very comfortably by the people who it is forced upon. They look at it, okay, it is being forced upon me. So my entire approach is that we have to realize it ourselves without actually being forced to do it. When we are forced to do something, we normally tend to resist it. As it is, we are forced to do so many things in our development proposals. As we know, building proposal, the approval process, they take time. There are many things that we look at is forced upon us. We don't appreciate it. But when we realize it ourselves, if you have environmental thoughts, for example, you yourself will do a rainwater harvesting without being told to do rainwater harvesting by the authorities. So the point here in slum approach is that you have to yourself try to think, what are the things that I can do that makes their living better and treat them, give them a better human life. Your first question, I was not unable to understand very clearly. Did it mean that should the slum building be as good as the building for the sale? Certainly you can try to make as good a building, because there are costs, I understand.
Probably the separate building. Probably the separate building also.
There are normally the slum projects are larger projects. They are not 800,000 meter plots normally. So because the larger projects, yes, the buildings that are made for the rehab are separate buildings altogether, because then the society is different And the way they will handle their land will be allotted to them, that will be different. So the buildings will have to be separate. So yes, there are separate buildings, but nothing stops us from making that building also nice and aesthetic.
Okay.
I firmly believe that that is the way ahead, that state parastatals or public authorities like MHADA have to work in partnership with the private sector to create housing. Now, the issue that then comes out is that the housing that the private sector creates is basically housing which cannot be accessed by the poor. MHADA tries to do, but it does so little that it is only a droplet. And therefore, for any future project that we do, if we can together create composite housing, which always invariably has a component of say 25 to 30% of housing, which is meant for the urban poor, then in that case, I think we should be able to arrest the problem that has been there over the last so many years.